Hey everybody, it's time for another Veterans Association of the USS Iowa interview. And today I have a very, very special guest. We are commemorating the recommissioning of the Iowa in 1984, which took place on this day. I didn't even think about how many years ago. It was 1984. So I guess you guys can all do the math. 2021 back to 1984. That's how long it's been. But think about this. So with me today is Admiral Gneckow, as we all know him as our skipper, CO, commanding officer, Captain Gneckow, who was the CO at the time of the commissioning back in 1984. And think about it. It was how many years ago has it been? And today was a day that you stood up on the ship and took command of a U.S. battleship. That's crazy to think, isn't it?
It's a day to remember, I tell you.
I just, so many people remember that vividly. Even when I talk to the veterans, they all remember it very, very well. But before we get into the interview, I just want to talk a little bit about how you and I met. Do you remember the very first time that you and I met?
Actually, I do. I was in a barber chair.
Yes, you were. You were in a barber chair. So quick background, it was a barber chair on a barge at the shipyard there in Pascagoula. I arrived into Norfolk on July 5th, and right away they sent me to barber school, which was 4 weeks. And I got out of barber school, and they had me doing something, I don't know what I was, watch standing or something. And I had tried out, they had tryouts for the Iowa football team there in Norfolk. And I tried out, I made the team. And the day I found out I made a team, somebody came up to me, the messenger of the watch came up to me and said, somebody, I want to say it was the XO, but it could have been somebody else. It could have been an admin type, but I thought it was the XO. And they called me, said, hey, he wants to talk to you. I go in the office, and they said, hey, by the way, we're sending you down to Pascagoula right away because the captain, the CO, says that a lot of the guys down there are having to go into town and pay for barbers to get a haircut. And so I said, well, I just made the football team. I said, well, you're on to Pascagoula in a couple of days. And that was that. And so I drove down to Pascagoula. There was no barbershop on base, but they sent me up. I guess it was like a barracks type barge where people could sleep, and I don't know what kind of a barge it was, but I remember I had one chair, and the very first day, I can't say 100% certainty, but I believe the first haircut was the supply officer, Commander Quigley, because he wanted to make sure I was going to be okay before I touched your hair. And then I'm pretty sure you were number two. And I remember you walking in, you introduced yourself, and I said, I'm SH3 John Curry. Nice to meet you, sir. And gave you a haircut. And the reason you did it was because you wanted everybody else in the crew to feel comfortable that this rookie barber right out of A school was going to be okay. And I must have did good because the next day my schedule was packed, and then the rest was history after that. But that is how you and I met way, way back when. And I guess it would have been September of '83, I guess, probably when it was. But let's talk about the commissioning. Real quickly, I just want to share a picture here. This is of us, because I really don't remember too much of the commissioning. Here's the whole troop. I would say probably most of the command was on the pier, don't you think?
You know, that picture brings back a lot of memories for me. When I think about the commissioning and about the Iowa, I always think about that day.
Yeah.
Because it was not only was it a special day, but it was. You look back and see this beautiful ship, all freshly painted and covered with bunting and flags, and you look out on the pier and you see 1,500 sailors ready to go, 15,000 visitors, including the vice president. I mean, he was going to be in the crowd.
Yeah.
The Secretary of the Navy, the Governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, the first CO of the ship, Captain Mccrae, not to mention all the people from the state of Iowa, all the people who represented the Iowa Veterans Association, and of course all our friends and family.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So there was a lot of people there.
You can't beat that.
You can't beat that. Just so you know where I was at. That's me. I'm the tall guy there in the middle there, standing at parade rest. And then that's what you probably remember. That's Wineone Smith to my right. and I will show you a picture later on. I stood next to him once we did the bring the ship to life. I stood next to him at parade rest on board the ship. In fact, I think I have that picture too. Let me see if I can't see if I have.
I didn't see a single guy there that needed a haircut either.
That's right. They're all ship shape. Yeah. So here we are. So this was my station. That's me and Y1 Smith at the top there next to the 5-inch mouth. That was where I stood after we brought the ship to life. And I don't remember how many times we rehearsed that part, but I do remember we rehearsed it a lot. And we would, I don't know who was in charge, just maybe the XO was the one in charge, but we'd all go down on the pier. We'd all stand at parade rest. He would bring the ship to life. We'd all run onto the ship, get into position. Then he would provide, or whoever was in charge, maybe it was you, maybe, I don't know, but whoever was in charge would provide feedback, and we go back to the pier and do it again until we got it right. But finally, and we'll talk about this later. We'll talk about my, because I know that you have family here. This is my family in attendance. That's my Uncle Paul with the hat on. He was a retired major in the Army. My Aunt Alice, my sister Suzanne, and my cousin David, who was visiting from Georgia. But that's kind of like, that was kind of like my day. And afterwards, I remember we had a party at a local hotel and got to spend time with family. I'm almost 100% positive that your day was a lot different than my day that day.
Well, it might have been, although I had all my family there too. My brother, my sister, their children, my aunt and uncle, all my own family and kids. So, we had our share of time together during that day too.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit later because I'm more interested to hear more about that story. Well, let's get in. Let's talk about the commissioning back in 1984. I guess you couldn't ask for better weather. I remember it being, I don't think it was too hot. I don't think it was too cold. It seems to me like the weather was perfect that day. Do you have any recollection of the weather?
Well, we actually, as much rain as they got in Pascagoula around that time, I guess we were pretty fortunate that we didn't have bad weather. But I have to preface my remarks by saying, remember, this is 38 years ago, 37 years ago. And I'm almost 80. I'm almost 85 years old, so my memory's not that great.
Hey, I'm 63, and I remember less than you do, so don't feel bad. I don't remember like there's lots of things as we talk into it. Like I'm thinking, I started thinking like I don't even remember like how I forgot that my family was even there in some parts of it, but I do remember them showing the ship and being very proud and taking them up to the mess decks and showing them the guns and stuff like that. And my sister, who lived in New York at the time, she also greeted the ship when we arrived in New York City, whenever it was that we went there that first time. And she also flew down to Martinique to visit me there. And if you recall, that visit got cut short because of a typhoon or hurricane, something. So we had to leave and left my sister in a hotel during a hurricane. That might be a story for another time, but yeah. And she was there in 2012 when the museum was commissioned. So so she's been a big supporter. And of course, my father was on the USS Pennsylvania, so I grew up, knowing about battleships, and he's one of the reasons why I decided to go to. I was a reservist. I did a 2-year recall. Anyways, that's how I got started. But let's get back to you and the day that you had there back in 1984, the commissioning ceremony. And the first question I have, when I got my orders, I was told that I wasn't going to see any sea time. That the entire time would probably be spent at Pascagoula because it was going to take that long to get the ship up and ready and commissioned. But world events changed. I remember the New Jersey was off the coast of Lebanon. And at some point, I believe, again, my memory is very faded. I believe somehow either you came on TV or you made an announcement, but somehow the word got out that they had accelerated our commissioning date, and that instead of like in late 84 or 85, it was going to be like April of 84. Do you have any recollection of that happening and that what that thought process was?
Well, yeah, I don't recall actually receiving any sort of a message.
Yeah.
announcing that. But if you probably don't remember that we weren't actually in on the decision-making process for the actual contracting and building of the ship was the responsibility of Ingalls and the supervisor of shipbuilding.
Yeah.
We were just basically there to accept the ship when it was ready.
Oh.
And so we had a group of people in Pascagoula who were overseeing what was happening, and we had the lion's share of the crew was, of course, in Norfolk.
Yeah.
Training and getting ready to come down. So when we actually when I received the information that the ship was going to be accelerated by 6 months, my initial reaction was, it can't be done. There's no way it can be done, because even if the shipyard people worked around the clock and got their portion of the job done, there was so much that needed to be done to the ship that was not a part of the contract.
Yeah.
That we were going to need. We had really planned to do the upgrades to most of the enlisted berthing areas and whatnot at future ships availability. And so when we found out that that wasn't going to happen, we weren't going to an availability, we were going to go to commissioning, we had to figure out some way to get all this work done that was going to be required to accommodate the crew. And I just said, it can't be done.
Yeah.
But I underestimated the crew of the Iowa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because all we had to do was get them down there.
Yeah.
And put them to work, and they got the job done.
Yeah, they did. I remember being at the barracks. And the first couple months, there was it was a very small crew. I want to say it was like 50 or so. It was less than 100. I remember it was a very small crew. And I was the only barber, so it had to be less than 100. And then all of a sudden, maybe it was on December. I don't know when it was, but at some point every day, like another 50, 60 guys arriving, another 100 guys arriving. And they just started coming down fast. And next thing you know, it's like the barracks was like packed. And I wish I remember the day we moved on the ship, but I remember it was a big day. It was a big process because you got to move in, you got to get your stuff in there. There's a lot of it I don't recall, but I know that when you take 1,500 people and you have them in a building over here, and then you got to walk with your sea bag and go all the way over to the battleship and then move in one day, right. That had to be a crazy, crazy day for everyone involved. And maybe some people that watch this video can make comments in the Facebook comment section and talk about what do you remember? Do you remember about move-in day, or what do you remember about the commissioning? Because I do remember like being just shocked and surprised that it was like all of a sudden we're like, okay, we're going from like commissioning next year to commissioning like very, very soon. So that was
this was also one of the first my memories of shipyard workers and enlisted personnel working side by side on the same project. Usually that doesn't happen. The shipyard doesn't just say, hey, listen, why don't you guys go ahead and fix up this part of the ship and we'll work on that part. That usually the shipyard gets a contract and they do everything, and then you proceed from there. But to have all of our crew working on the ship at the same time that the shipyard workers were there and doing their part was unique in a way, and it was kind of a trial for the Navy to see whether that would work. But we made it work.
Yeah, that's a really good point, though, because I'm guessing, and I don't know, I have no recollection, but I'm guessing the shipbuilding, there had to be a union involved, and the fact that I'd be interested. I mean, we don't need to get into, because that's another whole story. But to me, it seems interesting that there had to have been a lot of negotiating with the shipyard as far as how many hours you need to work now, what kind of a course you need to get done, and by the way, you're going to be working side by side. There had to have been a lot of negotiating done with the shipyard to get that done. But that's a different conversation. I think that's fascinating because I do remember, you're right, that we worked side by side, and everybody pitched in and got things done, whether it was painting or shining or brassing or whatever it was. Your whole techs, your electricians, your engineers, all those people, everyone involved, whether it was painting the barber shop or getting the laundry machines up and running, because that ship had been sitting around since the 50s, right?
Right.
And so to get that thing ready, it's an amazing story, to be honest with you. And I think most guys that experienced that have good memories of that. It was a huge accomplishment, not only for the ward room and the chief's mess, but the enlisted as well. So BZ to everybody involved.
Yeah, and of course, what a lot of people, our crew, of course, remembers it, but others didn't know that they were working 12, 14 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nobody complained. Well, nobody complained to me anyway.
They probably complained to Master Chief Scott and to the XO, but they never got to you. I said, like, wow, everyone's happy working all these hours. You bet, Skipper. Well, let's talk about the ceremony itself. I have a list of questions that I wanted to ask you that you and I have already talked about. Vice President Bush was a keynote speaker. Do you recall the first time meeting him in your first conversation? And did the Vice President, did he meet the XO and Master Chief Scott, and what was that like? And I'll share a picture while you talk about that.
Okay. Well, of course, when Vice President Bush and his party arrived, the first thing that we did was we took him into a separate building where I briefed the Vice President and the Secretary of the Navy and St. Lant Fleet Admiral about what was going to take place during the ceremony, what the procedure was going to be. And so actually, he and I didn't talk much except to meet and greet, and then I briefed them, and then we went immediately from that building over to the ship.
Yeah.
And I think this picture shows us kind of. I was ahead of him, and so the Vice President's coming up the brow here or something, and truthfully, I was so scared that my mind went blank. I couldn't even think of who the guy was. And
that's me with you in the barbershop chair.
Yeah, and of course Bobby Scott standing there, and I'm going, I need to introduce the Master Chief to Vice President Bush, and I couldn't get the words out. So Bobby Scott just stepped forward and stuck out his big old paw and said, "I'm Master Chief Bobby Scott." And of course the Vice President said, "Well, glad to meet you."
I like this picture.
That was their conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking at Master Chief Scott's, which is, by the way, for those that don't know this, Master Chief Scott was obviously the Master Chief of Command at the time, Bobby Scott, a legendary Command Master Chief, who regretfully is no longer with us. But I like the fact that he's walking and his arms are still at attention while he's coming up to him. See that? Yeah. And then, of course, that's interesting. I would imagine for Master Chief Scott that had to have been a great moment for him as well. And then, of course, you showed him around the ship, and you and I talked about this beforehand. You did I guess this is something that's very common with commissionings, maybe, but you did like some type of inspection.
Well, yeah, of course, when the Vice President first came aboard, they played ruffles and flourishes and all that stuff. And then the next sequence, in the next event in the sequence, is to inspect the honor guard.
Yeah.
So this was our Marines, MARDAT, formed an honor guard for the President to inspect. And you can see our commanding officer of the MARDAT right there beside him. He's going to lead him through and let him inspect all the troops.
Wow. I believe the captain, the CO of the Marine detachment was a captain, right? That was his rank of captain, Marine captain.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I believe he was at the last reunion in LA, if I recall. I remember seeing him there, so it was great to see him.
He was at the last reunion.
Yeah. We had a great Marine detachment. Great guys, is what I can remember.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then another thing, obviously, now this was before the actual ceremony, but then also afterwards, let me find this picture here. You got a little bit of time to, like, I guess, have an opportunity to just talk to him and show him around with there's Secretary of Navy Lehman there with you. This is after the ceremony, and it looks like you're, discussing the guns maybe, or discussing the ship or the capabilities. Maybe he didn't know. Wasn't Bush a Navy man, Navy pilot?
He was, yeah, he was a Navy guy, but he was an aviator, and
Yeah.
so this was something relatively new to him, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to give him a short explanation. You know, you can't. I don't give short explanations, but anyway, I was trying to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the Secretary of the Navy was going, come on, let's move it.
Move it along. Did you ever take him into your wardroom, into your room? Do you recall?
You know, we did have an opportunity to go through the wardroom and through the captain's cabin.
Yeah.
And whatnot. I don't have great recollection of that, but
Yeah.
there is I don't know, I might be getting ahead here, but there's a little bit of a story about the vice president's flag.
Oh, that was the next question. Go right ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, of course, while he was on board, he was the senior officer on board, so we flew his flag. And at the conclusion of the ceremony, of course, then his flag is presented to him. And he then, in turn, we were having a little reception, and he and I were commiserating and talking. We were up in the front of the audience, and he presented me with his flag, and he said, "Here, I want you to have this." And so I thanked him, and I laid it down on the podium, and then he and I went around to do some glad handing and whatnot with the people who were present. And when I came back, the flag was gone, and we never found it. So somebody in the crew or someone who was in attendance has a great souvenir from the Iowa commissioning.
I wonder, because I met Vice President Bush after he was president. He was a guest speaker here in Portland. And even then, he had a lot of Secret Service people around him, or people that were called like handlers, as you would say. And I'm wondering if maybe somebody that was part of his detachment saw that flag and didn't realize that he had given it to you and said, "Oh, this is the vice president's flag. We got to, make sure we grab this." Yeah, that's a bizarre story. And the XO didn't know, and no one knew. Interesting.
No one knew. But I can make the story even worse, because in that little compartment where we were having this reception, my sister-in-law happened to be present. And we had all these Secret Service people around, and lots of other guests and dignitaries. And she leaned on against the light switch and turned off the lights. And so you want to talk about Secret Service going nutso? They're running around trying to figure out, are we under attack or what the heck's going on here?
Oh my goodness! Did they handcuff Did they handcuff her and everything?
No, but I wanted to beat her, but she was too out of reach.
I bet you the blood pressure of those Secret Service agents would skyrocket at that moment, and probably Vice President Bush too, I would guess, because I can totally imagine all the lights going out. The Secret Service, I'm sure, were there, and wow. That's a great story. That's a really great story.
It all turned out okay.
Yeah. Well, and then I don't recall, Bush really didn't stay that long, right? At some point, he just said, "Thank you very much," and shook your hand and walked away, right? Probably.
That was it.
I bet you he didn't walk. I bet you he didn't walk back to the gate.
I bet he didn't. I think he had a nice limousine waiting for him.
And I'm wondering, that's you're bringing up these memories that I kind of forgot, and I'm thinking, and it brings up memories like, did they helicopter him in? Because there's no international airport in Costa Rica. I'm sure he probably flew into Mobile. Maybe he had a car and they drove him. I'm sure you don't know, but it's just kind of interesting because the vice president is a pretty big deal. And I can't imagine that they didn't have some way to get him around in a very comfortable and easy manner. I'm guessing maybe he had his own plane. He probably had his own plane in Mobile waiting for him, and he just drove back there or helicopter there or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't recall, so I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. Well, let's move on then. I will say this, though. I do remember all the speeches were outstanding. The chaplain's invocation and benediction was good. Your speech was good. The vice president's was good. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a secret, and we're going to get a little political here, but just itty bitty. My dad was a Navy guy for 20 years, retired as a boatswain. He was a very staunch Democrat his whole life, and as I was too. But if I tell you, when George Bush gave that speech on that ship, I was like, those Republicans, they ain't that bad after all. I just remember,
Yeah.
and I also, a few years ago, I was really interested because I remember that speech so good. I said, I really wish I could find a way to get that. So I wrote to the George Bush Library and said, is there any like documents or written testimony of his speech that he gave that day? And they all said, yes, there is, but you have to put in a formal request to get this, in order to get the speech, the document or whatever. They'll give you a copy of it or something like that. And I didn't do it. And then, of course, now we have the entire video, which was released this morning on Facebook. So now we can see the entire speech, your speech, the whole ceremony from the beginning to the very end. But I do remember it was a great day. The speeches were great. And I think that everything went off really, really smoothly. So at the end of the ceremony, so you had, I'm guessing, Secretary Lehman gave a speech, the Vice President gave a speech, and then I think you took command. Somebody, I guess the Vice President said, okay, you did the little ceremony where the Vice President says you are now the commanding officer. That's how my memory went. But I want to show this quick picture here. Well, let's show a picture here first of the Vice President giving his speech, because this is such a great picture of Vice President George Bush giving the speech. And you know what's amazing? I'm thinking about that Marine there off to the right of George Bush, and what it was an honor for him to stand there, even if it was like for an hour or whatever it was. But what an honor that he got to be selected to be that close and to see what his view was of the audience, the same view that you had with 15,000 feet. But what a great picture of Mr. Bush doing the speech there. Any recollections from you on? Do you remember anything what he did? Or
Well, I don't really remember much of his speech, but I know it was focused largely on the capability of the ship, the necessity to get it into action quickly, and the sacrifices that the crew made to make it possible.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And so then here's a picture. This is you wrapping up your speech. The picture I really like about this is because you're smiling because you just got done giving a speech in front of 15,000 people. George Bush is happy. The secretary's happy. Everyone up there is happy. And I gotta think that at that moment you took the command of the ship. You're now the active commanding officer of a U.S. battleship, Iowa class battleship. There must have been some relief that that part was over with, right?
Yeah, because I was pretty nervous, I tell you. But when you're looking out on the pier and seeing all of your shipmates, it makes it a little easier.
Yeah, yeah. I can't even imagine getting up there and you had your book, you had your speech written out, obviously, and you got there front there, and it was a beautiful day, like we talked about the weather-wise. And you look at it, and you have the Veterans Association is there. You have families and friends. Probably had a lot of shipyard workers were probably in attendance. Probably the big shots of what was the name of the shipyard? Lindell's or gosh, I can't remember the name. Ingalls Shipyard. Yes. Yeah. See, your memory's better than mine. But I mean, I'm sure the big shots they were there, so that had to be a problem for them. And so I just want to say, show this one last picture because this was taken before the ceremony. But look how great the ship looks. All the hard work that everybody put in to make that ship look so nice. And it doesn't look like it hadn't been used in, God, how many years? 30 years. And look at all those people there, all the bunting, and it's an amazing testament to the wardroom, the chief's mess, and the crew that day went off so well, so smoothly. But I tell you, the ship looks great from what I can remember. And a lot of people put a lot of time to make that thing look like that.
Yeah, do you have a picture of the actual coming to life ceremony? I can't remember.
No, I don't have a picture coming to life, but we'll get into that next. But before we do this, well, I have this picture up here. Just quickly, you mentioned that you had some family. How many people from your family were in attendance?
There must have been around 15, I'm going to say,
Uh-huh.
of my family, wife, my children, my brother and sister and their children, and aunts and uncles and cousins and whatnot. So we had a big crowd, yeah.
And so after the big ceremony is done and you finish the speech, the ship comes to life, it's been recommissioned, and everyone goes their way. That evening, I'm assuming you didn't put yourself in a duty section. I'm assuming that you were free that night.
You know, I think we must have had a big family blowout that night, I guess.
That's what we did. I'm assuming you had a big family blowout someplace
Yeah.
because the family, obviously, they probably stayed out in town, right, at a hotel. At least that's what my family did. I don't know what hotel they stayed
Yeah.
in, but they were in town. And I remember celebrating with them for a while. And then here's a quick story for you. A bunch of us, a lot of your hardworking sailors that worked hard, played hard, a lot of us had rented hotel rooms, and we drank a little bit. Actually, we drank quite a bit. I remember being in a hotel room with the bathtub and the toilet packed with ice and beer, and that's how we celebrated that night. Probably a little bit different than what you're celebrating. But I did have dinner with the family and such, and that was really nice.
Great.
But I will say this. I'll get to the next question. As I stated before, I had members of my family in attendance. But to all of them, their biggest memory of the ship and the ceremony, besides the speeches, was when either you or the XO, it might have been the XO, said, gave the order to bring the ship to life. And
that was it. That was my order to the XO. Was
there you go.
The
okay. What do you recall about that? Because that was beautiful.
Well, I mean, hey, when we had all these sailors running aboard, we had radars going around. We had gun mounts twirling around, elevating and depressing. And I was actually standing at the podium with Vice President Bush at that time. Mm-hmm. And the turret trained out toward the audience.
Wow.
So the audience is looking at these three, might have been six, guns pointed in their direction. And Vice President Bush said to me, and I got to think that he was kidding, but he said, they're not going to shoot, are they? And so I said, no, they're not going to shoot. But and then we started having a little conversation, give and take.
Yeah.
And somebody, I guess one of George Farrar's minions came up and said, "Hey, do you guys know you got an open mic there?" So anyway, whatever George Bush and I were talking about at the time was available for the entire audience to hear.
Oh my goodness sakes! I doubt very much anybody really remembers that. But how funny would it have been if you put some like smoke charges or some blanks in there, just like.
I think that's what he was concerned about.
Well, luckily, I think they were pointing towards Houston, so that probably would have been okay. I don't know. Well, I do remember that it was a great ceremony, and it was a very big success. I don't know. I'm sure that everybody that walked away from there had a great impression of the ship. And I don't really remember. I do remember at some point we did that whole Good Morning America thing. I wish I had got that picture up, but we did the Good Morning America where we were all standing on. And I remember there was a camera on a crane or something. We were all like,
in a crane, yeah.
And I remember like, hold on, it's gonna, wait. I remember we waited a long time before I was okay, ready, 3, 2, 1, Good Morning America. And that was kind of fun. I wish I could find a video of that someplace. Maybe I'll check with Mr. Farrar. Maybe he knows how to access. Maybe there's a video of that someplace.
Well, there's also a lot of posters of that. The Navy, that was a poster child for the Navy for a long while.
Right.
So you can probably find that somewhere too.
We were the second ship, right? New Jersey was first, and then Iowa.
Right.
And then was it Wisconsin or the Missouri that came after that? Do you remember?
I think it was Wisconsin came next.
Yeah, yeah. I do remember a lot of our guys went over. So a little history lesson. The New Jersey was off the Lebanon, I believe, at around Christmas time of '83. And we did this duty thing where a lot of the guys on the Iowa, on the ship that were assigned to the Iowa, were going to be sent over to Lebanon, to the Jersey, and do 2 weeks duty on the New Jersey, which would allow a lot of the guys in the New Jersey to go home. Is that my recollection correct about that?
Yeah, I think it is. And not only to let them go home, but also to give our guys some training. We had the guys who went there and learned how to steer a battleship and came back as our helmsmen.
Yeah. You know, that's something that people probably don't realize. It's typically, again, I'm not much of a navigation expert, but the helmsmen aren't they typically enlisted?
Always. Yeah, always. Yeah, usually a bosun mate or a quartermaster, but or a seaman right out of the deck force.
Yeah. Imagine you go home and like, what did you do, Daddy, in the Navy? Well, I was 19 years old and I steered a battleship.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? That's crazy. Okay, so I'm just going here. Like I said, the coming to life was the best part. My sister to this day still talks about that. Maybe one of these times we'll talk about Liberty ports because it's bringing back some memories about Martinique, and going into New York City was a pretty big deal for you too, especially at that time. So maybe at another later date we can talk about that. But today we'll concentrate on the commissioning. This is being posted on the Veterans Association Facebook page, and I recall, I don't have any memory of it, and you probably have some memory of it, but many members of the Veterans Association of the USS Iowa at that time were in attendance, including the commanding officer, Captain Mccrae. Did you get a chance to speak with them, and if so, did he give you any advice about being, and I'll bring up a picture of the CO. Do you remember, like, any advice or any discussions that you may have had with him?
You know, I do. I remember that when he came aboard, I think he was escorted by his daughter, and I believe he was in his 90s at the time. But
wow,
he was still very spry, and he walked around the ship quite a bit. And he came back after his tour and said, well, "Captain, I think your ship is ready for sea."
Oh man.
And then he went on to say, but let me give you some advice before you take off. He said, the Navy and the Department of State always are going to view the battleship as a public relations tool. They want to show the flag. And so they're going to try to send you places where a battleship can't fit. So remember that you're 38, you have a draft of 38 feet. They're going to try to send you places that are too shallow to enter. So be careful. I said, yes, sir, I got it. And sure enough, the Department of State and the Navy itself tried to send us places where the water was so shallow we could not possibly get in. So I took his advice to heart, and it worked out for me.
That's really interesting because I do recall some Liberty ports. I do remember we were manning the rail, and I want to say it was the Virgin Islands, is my recollection. I could be wrong. And I remember we were manning the rail, we were in our whites, and I had those black core frames, and it was really hot, and my toes were burning. But I remember I was on the aft part of the ship, and I could tell the ship was, I don't know, my memory could be, but it seemed like it was shaking a little bit. I remember looking in the water, and you could see all the what do you call it, the mud. It's like, it looked like it was like we were like right on the mud, right on the bottom of the ocean, or the whatever it was that you call it at that time. But I remember, like, it took a little while, like, are we stuck? You know, but we got out of there, obviously. But do you recall, like, any specific places that were a little tough?
Yeah, I remember one, and this might have been in Guatemala or Costa Rica. Anyway, yeah. we were trying to back into a berth that was so shallow that we couldn't get in there, and they didn't have any tug assistance to hold us, and so we finally just said we give up. We have to go to an anchorage somewhere, and pulled out and went to anchorage.
I want to say, so Costa Rica, I remember Costa Rica, we were a pier side, I'm pretty certain. But I do remember Honduras, we were not. And then also another place, and like again, we're kind of winding up the topic here, but I do remember we went to Venezuela, and then in the middle of the stay, or the middle of the night, you decided to move the ship. And we moved the ship to a different spot in Venezuela. I don't remember what that was all about. And we don't need to get into that. Maybe that's for a different conversation. But I do remember we went into some interesting ports for sure when we went to the Caribbean.
Yeah. Well, I do remember that particular incident, and the reason we had to move was to go to a fueling pier. We couldn't get fuel where we were.
Oh, is that what it was? Okay. It's bringing back all these memories. I tell you, we got to do this again because I'm thinking about the time where there was because we were all on Cinderella Liberty. And I remember there was somebody spread the rumor that the XO had given permission for everybody to stay on shore. And so a whole bunch of us stayed overnight. We got back to the ship the next day. No one had granted Cinderella Liberty. Oh, we got into a lot of trouble. That was quite interesting. All right. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up things here. Do you have any final thoughts about the commissioning day? Any final memories that you want to share that we haven't discussed?
Nothing beyond what I said in my speech was how proud I was of the crew and all the work they did.
Yeah.
And that very few people knew how many hours and the dedication that they put forward.
Yeah.
I was so proud of them.
Yeah. I'm gonna. Like I said, we posted the video this morning, and I haven't had a chance to go back and look at it, but I'm going to go back and watch those speeches because it's been a long, long time. But all these years, and I've talked to other people, I'm sure you know, like Steve Mason and some of these other guys that you knew that were in the executive department. But everyone I've talked to talked about what a great command it was and what a great warden we had, great chiefs. The whole experience was a positive experience for a lot of people. Now, I only did 2 years. I left in July of '85. Go back to my reserve status here in Portland, Oregon. But even to this day, I have great memories of the commissioning, and my sister talks about it all the time. I know my uncle was so happy to be in attendance. He was in his 70s or 80s when he showed up there. And he walked up to me, and he was kind of a big guy, put his big arm, and he's like, "That was a great ceremony, John. That was awesome." So I know a lot of the family were very, very appreciative of what you did and what the command did to make that ceremony go off all those years ago today. So I have just a couple more questions here. Something that you and I had talked about, because I didn't know about this until you mentioned this to me, was that besides the commissioning, another big moment of the big stick, as it was nicknamed, was loading ammo for the first time, which we did underway. And I'll bring up a picture, but what memories? I mean, that's not normal, right? To bring ammo at sea?
No, well, in small quantities, but not your entire ammunition load. As far as I know, no ship had ever done this before, and I don't think any ship has done it since. But because of the acceleration and the need to get us trained and over to take New Jersey's place off of Beirut, we were trying to do everything in the quickest manner possible. And part of that was to reduce the time it would take to load ammunition, because we would have had to go all the way up to the nearest ammunition depot, which I think was in Norfolk or somewhere. But
Yorktown,
we wanted to cut that time, and so they brought down an ammunition ship. And I think it was our second day underway, we went alongside the ammunition ship for 24 hours.
Wow.
While we loaded all of the ammunition aboard. And it was only possible, truthfully, because we had trained in advance. We sent bosun mates and gunners mates and people off to training courses where they could learn how to do this on dry land, so they were ready to do it when we got underway. And it went very smoothly, but you think about 24 hours alongside another ship just yards away, and think of all the things that have to go into that to make it happen and to do it safely. It was incredible. Yeah. And I was so proud of those guys.
So was the ship bare of any ammunition before that?
Well, we did get permission to load our Tomahawk and Harpoon missiles at the pier, which was
Okay.
also very unusual.
Yeah.
But, yeah, but but they were not. We could not get permission to load all of those 16-inch projectiles. Just too much explosive in one location, so we had to do that at sea.
Okay, so it's something that's popped in my head, and I'm gonna ask you this question. You're a retired admiral in the U.S. Navy, and if you want to answer in a military way, you're more than welcome to by denying everything. But did we ever have nuclear missiles on that ship?
Well, there is a patent response to that.
I cannot confirm or deny.
Confirm or deny. Well, I mean, we obviously had a nuclear capability.
Right, right.
But we, I guess it's no secret at this point that there were never any nuclear weapons on board, even though it was suspected by others.
Yeah,
there were.
yeah. Well, I think that was one of the whole protest part with Jesse Jackson up in New York City, which is another whole discussion. But I remember that was one of the reasons why they were so upset. They thought we were bringing nukes into the city or something like that. But don't go into there. That's another whole long story.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I do remember the ammunition, and I do remember that workday we put in some pretty long hours at sea. But we also had great liberty. That trip to the Caribbean was a great trip, and we had a lot of great liberty in those ports. And again, I think that will go for another day, because I would like to talk to you about some of those ports and some of the things that we saw and did. Well, listen, we're about ready to wrap up here. One of the things that I was most impressed with your performance as a commanding officer was that you made smart decisions. You made good decisions. And as a captain of any ship, any commanding officer, and you've been around a long time and you've seen this, not all commanding officers make right decisions. But sometimes they're really, really hard decisions. And I'm guessing that in those early days of being the commanding officer of the ship, either both the Pascagoula or the first year or first 2 years, there was a lot of tough decisions that you had to make. Can you reflect on any? Do you remember any specific decisions that you made that were tough?
Well, I do have some recollection of those things. Well, remember that this is my third ship that I was commanding officer. Commanding officer of John S. McCain, DDG, commanding officer of the Richmond K. Turner, CG. So to be commanding officer was not my first experience. Right. But I would have to say that because of the quality of the people that served on Iowa, there weren't any really hard decisions for me to make, because most of the decisions were made before they ever got to me. The guys knew, they knew what they were supposed to do. They did it. They didn't bring problems to me. They brought solutions. And I just have to say that because of the quality of the officers and the quality of the board officers and the chief petty officers, being commanding officer of that ship was much easier than being commanding officer of the two previous ships, where I had much less in the way of experience. Yeah. And I didn't choose any of these officers or chief petty officers. Because I told the Bureau of Naval Personnel to just send me the best people. I'm not going to tell you who I want. You send me the best, and they did, obviously. Yeah. And the only person I chose out of all the time that I had an opportunity to make a decision about personnel was when I interviewed the 6 or 7 Master Chiefs, E9s, who were there to ask for the job of Master Chief of the Command.
Well, I didn't know that.
And that was also my best decision.
Yeah. Yes.
When I chose Bobby Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. Great Master Chief. I remember his office because my berthing area was over by the post office and the dispersing office, and I would have to walk by his office every day to get to the chow line or get to the mess decks. And not only was he tough, which a good Master Chief is, but he was also approachable, which was really nice for a lot of the enlisted people. And he always wandered around and he'd ask us, hey, how you doing? How are things going? And if he had a problem, he had an open door, like, okay, if you need a chit chat or whatever, come see me. Use a chain of command, use a proper chain of command. But that's one of my jobs is to take care of the troops. And and the XO was a great XO too. I mean, the upper chain of command there was outstanding. I didn't realize that you had, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say that I think Bobby Scott was one of the guys who was instrumental in making the decision about facial hair on board the ship. As you recall, it was forbidden.
Right.
Nobody had any facial hair on the Iowa. But I think that was a Bobby Scott thing. He's the one who pushed for that, and he enforced it. And I think it worked good for us.
Well, another thing too, and I don't know where this came from. I mean, it had to come from you because it had to be a command decision. Was that somebody authorized at sea, and during working at sea, we could wear emblematic T-shirts instead of our dungarees. And we could wear a shirt that said, like, maybe not like this, but like the big stick is back or something. If you go look at this cruise book from '84, there's a lot of pictures of these guys working at sea wearing emblematic T-shirts. Now, it works both ways because A, they're more comfortable, it's easier to work in, but obviously it helps sales, and the sales goes to MWR, which helps for beach parties, and I think we had a couple of command parties here and there. But I remember being like, wow, that's really cool that they decided to let us do that.
Yeah, and we had some really great emblematic shirts that guys love to wear too.
Yeah, hats. I mean, even to this day, I have some emblematic stuff up there that I've kept all these years, and I'm sure, like, obviously you have your hat on there. But yeah, it was a great ship store. It was a great ship store. We had great ship store operators because I was in S3 division. I remember R.T. Smith, Andre Bracy. We had a lot of great people in all the departments and stuff like that. But just briefly, I'm going to wrap things up here. Any last final thoughts or anything else that you can think of that you want to share as far as the commissioning is concerned? I think we should have another one of these in the future where we talk about the Liberty and the cruises. Oh, I do have one last question for you. It came up with me when we were discussing the Liberty ports and stuff. So they accelerated our commissioning because they wanted us to relieve the New Jersey. That's correct?
Yes.
But at some point, that changed, and they canceled that. Do you recollect how that happened, how that came about?
I think a presidential decision was made to rescind the order for a battleship on station.
Gotcha.
And I don't know whether that was a result of what was going on in Lebanon at the time, or just an admission that we couldn't keep it up.
Yeah.
But I do remember that eventually the idea of us taking New Jersey spot was canceled, and then we proceeded on to our next training event.
Yeah. Was that Puerto Rico? Did we go? We went to Puerto Rico, right? We trained or shot guns or something in Puerto Rico. It seems like
we did naval gunfire sport in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. I do remember because I remember like telling my family, says, "Yeah, we're going to go relieve the New Jersey," and then I remember coming back. Well, instead we're going to go to Martinique. We're going to go to Costa Rica. We're going to go to Fort Lauderdale. We're going to head down the Caribbean and have a Caribbean cruise, 5 days at sea and 2 days in port. That was a great cruise. That 84 cruise was a fantastic cruise, as was the trip to New York City. So, well, listen, Admiral, it's so great to talk to you and hear your stories of the day that was lived in infamy as far as commissioning goes. I know that everybody watches this will appreciate your memories and the stories that you share of your day. Like you said, your day was a little bit different than my day. I didn't have to sit there and shake hands with the Vice President of the United States, future President of the United States. But again, thank you for sharing your memories and sharing your stories. I just want you to stay here. I'm just going to stop the recording and then we'll talk afterwards. But thank you again. Any last words that you want to say to the troops?
Thank you for making my day.
There you go. You know what? Who came up with that? Was that a slogan that you came up with, or was that something that had always been there?
No, I think it was a Clint Eastwood movie.
Right.
Go ahead, make my day.
Go ahead, make my day. I have a bumper sticker on my car that says that with the guns, USS Iowa, go ahead and make my day. Thanks again, Admiral, and you stay here. I'm just going to end the recording. Take care.